So the title of my presentation is Why Do We Do Research? Strategies for Engaging the Public in What We Care About. So there is some kind of an assumption in that title, right? I assume that we all care about our research, and we care about why do we do research. That may be very obvious for a lot of us, but maybe not for all of us. So I would like to start this presentation by kind of encouraging you to ask this question to yourself. Why do I do the research I do, right? Sometimes, especially during your doctoral program, you can go very deep into particular theoretical discussions or methodological discussions, like say the concept of intersectionality, right? We have a big discussions there. It was proposed by Crenshaw. Then we have Jasbir Puar proposing a more postmodern view on intersectionality. And it could be a very dense and abstract theoretical discussion, which is important. But I think I would like to encourage you to kind of step back and think about, yes, but why is it actually important? Well, the original idea behind talking about intersectionality was to think about discrimination and how to make the world more just. So I think this is what we are now thinking about. Sometimes we need this kind of step back to think about, okay, we have those theoretical discussions, we have discussions in our field, we have our own projects, we have discussions about the methods, but why actually are we doing that? What's the big thing driving our research? So that's my kind of starting reflection. And the plan for today is, first, very briefly, I would like to tell you something about my work, because that's important to know when I will present you some of my public engagement activities. So then I will very briefly, again, define what is public engagement for me. And then the biggest part of my presentation would be how to do it. Is that a comprehensive guide? Not really. You know, there are different public engagement activities that you might be interested in or might be available for you depending on your topic, depending on your discipline. So you have to do some kind of work yourself here. For example, identifying key stakeholders, maybe blogs that publish on your topic and so on. So what I will do here, I will give you some tips based on my own experience with my research. So in many times, I hope it could be very useful for you as well, but you have to translate it into your own work, into your own topics and disciplines. And then finally, at the very end, very shortly, I think, I would like to also reflect why actually to do it, why it's important to do that. So let's start with the first part very briefly. As Stefania said, what's my work about? My work is it is based in media and communication studies and sociology studies, and it's about queer digital media studies. So very often I'm just interested in LGBTQ cultures, gender diversity, so issues like new labels of emergence of new labels such as non-binary, gender fluid, and so on, as well as transnationalism. So I'm thinking about the national identity intertwined with gender and sexuality, about globalization and migration as well. So in one of my projects, I analyzed Polish LGBTQ websites and basically their content and some interviews with webmasters, thinking about mainly national identity. In another project, the one in the middle, I analyzed gay and lesbian magazines that were published in Poland in the 1980s. Here I was more interested in kind of transnational flows of the ideas about what it means to be gay or LGBTQ, what it means to do LGBTQ activism. And my most recent project, I worked with Polish LGBTQs in the UK, asking them, mostly that was a survey and interviews, asking them about their identity, both gender, sexual, and national identities, about their migration experiences, as well as their uses of social media and dating apps. So that's more or less my research. You will learn a little bit more when I give you an example of my public engagement activities. So what is public engagement? There are probably a lot of different definitions of that. For me, it means communicating your research beyond academia. So some of you may also have heard the term impact, which is quite popular in the British academia. And it's not really exactly the same thing. Impact in the UK usually have a very specific meaning, which means that if you want to talk about impact, you should talk about some kind of change. Maybe your research influenced change in policy. Maybe your research influenced change in a particular organization, for example, how they recruit people. Maybe your research influenced the change in the perception of a particular issue. Let's say that because of your research now, the discussions about the refugees in the UK is framed in different ways, right? So it also could be that. So you could see that public engagement could be part of it, but it's kind of smaller than that. It doesn't have to be part of it. For me, public engagement is just communicating your research beyond academia, and then it could become an impact when it's actually influenced some change. So that's kind of an important differentiation, I think, how those words are being used in academia in the UK. So what are the aims of that? I think one aim of this public engagement is to putting a topic on the agenda. That was my aim with my work with Polish LGBTQs in the UK. There was a lot of discussions in the UK and also in Poland about big wave of Polish migrants and Central and Eastern European migrants in general to the UK after 2004 enlargement of the European Union. There was almost never discussions about LGBTQs within that. But you can also offer a critical new perspective on the topic that is already on the agenda. That was also part of my work. In those discussions of Polish or Central and Eastern European migrants in the UK, very often those groups were perceived in a very stereotypical way or depicted in a very stereotypical ways as conservative, religious, sexist and homophobic. So I also want to reframe it saying, well, some of them are also LGBTQs, you know. Another aims could be putting forward a proposition solution to a problem based on your research or mobilizing support. So you can also talk if you see that there is a new law that maybe will be very harmful for a particular marginalized group that you're working with, you may also kind of want to write a blog post about it and then mobilize support to act against it. So there are some kind of aims, for me, key aims of public engagement activities. Also, if something becomes not super clear, feel free to just put the questions in the chat during my talk as well. Or any questions you have, I'll be happy to react to it spontaneously, not only at the end of my presentation. So now the main part of my discussion, of my presentation, how to do it, how to do the public engagement activities. First, I think it's important to publish your academic work open access. I'm quite critical about academic publishing system as we know it, as it exists right now. I'm not going to talk about it now because the presentation is not about that. But it's important to consider publish your academic works in open access journals. Why? Because then there is a more chance that your article will be picked up by journalists, activists, organizations, and so on. It's just more freely available for a lot of people just to find it and use it. And here I give you one example. In my recent articles, I published in International Journal of Communication, which is open access journal. It's about, I called it digital gender disidentification. It's basically about how some Polish LGBTQs in the UK do not identify their gender in a binary way. So they identify as non-binary, gender fluid, gender fuck, and so on. And then by accident, I realized that this French slate actually used my article in this article. So they published a paper on like an article about it, and they actually quote exactly my article. They said, as sociologist Lukasz Szulc said in his article, they give the title of the article and then they quote the article. I think that would be less likely if I didn't publish open access. Now, I would say think about your career first. And for your career to get a job, then to get promoted and so on, it is important to publish in good academic journals. And that should be your first concern. Now, if some of those journals in your discipline are also open access, go for those ones. But don't prioritize open access in general, I would say. You know, there's a lot of different ways of doing your public engagement activities. So even if you publish not open access, you can still do something to engage the public in your work. So I would say it's not the most important thing to publish open access. I would always encourage that, but think about your career first. And if there are open access journals that are very good and respectable in your disciplines, go for them. But if the best journals are not open access, still try to publish at least something there, because that will help you to get a job and that will help you to get promoted later on. So that's my first advice. My second advice is translate your research into public output. So even if you publish some articles that are maybe not open access, you can still publish some extra things that are open access and that are aimed at the general public or specific communities. So here you could be very creative. You could have research reports. You can write blog posts. You can write op-eds. You can create podcasts as well. If you want to reach younger generation, the latest reports for how especially young people consume news actually shows that podcasts are on the rise. Zines as well. So here you see, you can decide about first what you like to do. Maybe you would like to do a podcast because you just simply like it, or you just like writing blog posts like I do. But also consider what maybe it's the best format for the research I'm doing. So for me, the research report from my survey with Polish LGBTQs kind of made sense more than anything else. There were very basic statistics like, what do you think about Brexit? Why did you move to the UK? What were your motivations? So, you know, those are very straightforward answers when you can give some percentages and numbers that then media like as well, because they can very easily say that many percentage of people saying that they came to the UK because, say, they are looking for work, as opposed to because they felt discriminated against in Poland, right? So that's an interesting kind of very basic, interesting facts that other media outlets could be interested in. So that's another thing to think about, and you can also think about other forms. So here I give you an example of my colleagues from the history department at the University of Sheffield, when they created a zine as a guide to queer history of Sheffield. So they just map different places historically that was important for the queer community in Sheffield, and then they contacted Pride organizers in Sheffield and were giving away this zine during the Pride parade, or whatever you call it, Pride March. So those are one kind of ways of thinking about translating your research into public output. Now, very often, how I actually think about it, and that was kind of a revelation for me when one of the senior colleagues told me once, that publishing a journal article is not the end of your work. Very often we spend so much time on writing this article, then we have to revise it and revise it and revise it, and it's finally published, and we just want to forget about it. Also, we're kind of tired with that. We know our argument inside out. We don't think it's maybe as exciting as it felt at the very beginning, but we shouldn't just leave it there. It's important to then start some kind of promotion work of that. And that could be promotion towards academic communities, but also towards non-academic communities. So very often what I try to, I have a rule for myself that each of my paper, each of my book chapter, will just have at least one public engagement output facing general public. Very often, in my case, it's blog post, but not always. So here you can see an example of one of my articles that I publish in Communication Theory, which is a very good journal in media and communications, but it's not open access. So again, I was a little bit strategic here. I said like, I don't usually write theoretical articles. I have this idea for a theoretical article. I think it could be published in this very good theoretical journal. I will do that. But then, because of my career, because of getting a job, because of getting later on promoted and so on, but at the same time, I also wanted to present that argument to the general public. So I wrote a blog post for one of the LSE blogs. It was called the Impact blog. Of course, I didn't write it the same way, so we have to translate it. Basically, this blog post, the argument of that blog post is basically the same as in my article. It's just a summary of my article, but in a, of course, much more condensed way and written in a different way. So my article starts with kind of big observation. We now make a lot of profiles in the social media, in the age of social media, which is not very great start for a blog post, I would say. You have to catch people's attention. So I start the blog post writing, how many social media profiles do you have? Do you feel that they express yourself accurately? And so on. So the kind of asking questions or presenting a story, like Emily has just discovered when she opened her profile on Facebook, she just discovered this and that. So there are some kind of techniques and the ways of writing for the public engagement that are different, that something that maybe you are more familiar with when you write an academic article. So you should keep that in mind as well. Now, in terms of blogs, I would say that there are two options there. You can just create your own blog and just start blogging about the issues that are interested for you or to you. Or you can just join the collective blogs, and joining already existing collective blogs, that would be my recommendation for you, because creating and promoting your own blog is a lot of job. It takes a lot of time. It takes some resources. You have to do it regularly, because otherwise people will lose interest in your blog. And there's also a lot of advantages of actually publishing your blog post on some collective blogs, because very often those blogs, there are editors there that will help you to edit your blog, and also they will help you to promote your blog post. So LSE blogs, for example, are very popular, and sometimes what people publish there are picked up by general media, and there are plenty of them on many different topics. So I gave you the link here on the slide, so you can check what kind of blogs they have. The blogs that I'm interested in personally in my field are also Notches, Remarks on History of Sexuality, or Ada Lovelace Institute, which is most about data and society. But so there are more specialized blogs as well. So you should also kind of go online and find out what are the important kind of academic or popular science blog posts in your discipline, and also check how they write it, what they write about, and consider writing for them as well. There are also some other outlets, very popular ones that are not topic specific, like The Conversation and Medium.com. I'm sure you're familiar with them. So also consider to publish with them as an option. So again, I think one big thing that I try to say here is, when you have an idea for an article and you want to publish it, it could be also a book chapter, don't think about it as just published and finished, but like, what else do I do with that to engage different diverse communities with that, not only academic community, but also non-academic communities. When to publish or pitch the blog post, or some other articles like op-eds, or maybe create a podcast, there are different ways of doing that and to think about it. For me, what I'm doing usually is maybe thinking about, would it be useful to publish my journal article, book chapter, before it's actually published to test the waters? I did it a lot with my book. So I published a book about those gay and lesbian magazines in communist Poland. That was published in the 1980s. So while I was writing those chapters, when I found something that I thought like, maybe I can't go that deep into that in my book, but it feels like it's a good 800, 1,000 word for a blog post. So I published that as a blog post, and then people commented on that, and I actually, those comments were very helpful for me to rewrite that chapter for the final version of my book. Another thing is just publishing it after the journal article, for example, is out. So the example I gave you before with the communication theory, that was that case. I just published the article, it was out there, and then I published a blog post about it, referring back to my academic article. So in a way, also promoting the article, but also for people who are not interested in academic articles, they could see my argument and my key point in how it matters for society in that blog post. Another tricks I would say that is useful to have in mind is anniversaries, especially big, well-established traditional media. They love anniversaries. So if they're especially round anniversaries, if there's a 20th anniversary of Poland joining the European Union, they will like to have some kind of reflection. Okay, 20 years on, what's changed? And then you can pitch your own perspective on that. Well, I would like to reflect on what it changed for Polish LGBTQ people, for example, traveling or migrating from Poland to the UK. Another thing is annual events, so like Black History Month, Pride Month. Very often, many different institutions, many different media outlets, they do want to have some content in that relations if it's something happening in those kind of months. So I always got some queries from journalists in Pride Month and the LGBTQ History Month, which is in February, always. But also pitching to some kind of more established outlets at that times gives you more chance to be accepted, as well as reacting to recent events. So I was interested in the topic of nationalism, how different countries are presented as LGBTQ friendly or not. And then the Conchita Wurst maybe won the Eurovision. So Conchita Wurst was what they call it, the bearded lady, bearded drag queen that won Eurovision. So I didn't work on Eurovision, I didn't work on Conchita Wurst, but it was important in the issues of transnationalism, how Europe is imagined, how different nations are imagined. So then I built on my work to comment on that particular event, and I published also an article about that. So sometimes you have to be more kind of very quickly reactive to what's going on in society, basically. So here's also one example of the anniversaries. So I told you about this book that I wrote about gay and lesbian magazines that were published in communist Poland. And as a background for that, I realized that in 1985, Polish police had an action they called Operation Hyacinth. There was an undercover action to trying to create a pink files. So basically trying to find as many information about mostly gay men, to some extent lesbians as well, created a file, an archive for the government about it. So I wrote a blog post about it at one point, but also in 2015, when there was a 20th anniversary of that, I wrote an article in Polish, and I actually contacted the biggest Polish daily, sending them this article saying, hey, this anniversary is coming, it's important. So this is my article. And I didn't know anybody there. I didn't have any contacts there. I just emailed them. And they, I think I emailed 2 other newspapers before, and they said like, yeah, we know it, we already commissioned some articles about it, but this newspaper probably forgot about it. And they said like, oh, wow, we forgot about it. Yes, we will accept it. And they accepted it immediately. And they even paid me for publishing it. And for me, that was important because, I want my research to have an impact. I do care about changing the perceptions of Polish history, of LGBTQ people. Nowadays, in my recent work, also Polish LGBTQs, Polish migrants, Polish LGBTQs in the UK, and so on. So that was very interesting for me. But again, I think if I just send this article to this big daily newspaper in any time, they probably wouldn't accept it. Maybe they would, I don't know that for sure, but that's my guess. But because I frame it, it's an anniversary, and it's important to reflect on that, then they accept it. Now, some of you may say, well, I don't know how to do it. We are being taught how to write academic articles, book chapters, or just monographs, your PhD dissertation in a very academic way. So how do I know how to write an op-ed, blog post? Well, you can always Google it. This is how I did it. There are actually a lot of great guides online. So here from the LSE blogs, you can find, I give you some examples here, how to write a blog post from a journal article. It's a great blog post, really helping you to think about it that way. Or the New York Times tips for aspiring op-ed writers. And very often, those newspapers like The Guardian, New York Times, and many, many others, they have those sections, pitch an article to us. And they have very specific rules. Like I think some newspapers would say, send us your article. Some of them say, don't send us the article, just pitch the idea in 2 or 3 sentences. Why is it important? What do you want to write about? And then we'll help, if we accept it, then we'll help you to shape it. So always kind of check that. What are kind of good outlets for you? What do you want to, where do you want to publish, and so on. Now, the third tips would be promote your research on social media, especially Twitter, because Twitter is important kind of public discussions space. There's a lot of academics there. There are a lot of journalists there. A lot of organization activists are checking Twitter regularly as well. So here it's just, I have not much to say except for the fact that you shouldn't be shy. I know that there is this kind of feeling, well, I don't want to promote myself, it's so in your face, and I don't want to come off as like showing off. My advice to you is forget about it, don't be shy. I always think about it as I owe it to my participants and my research. I spent 4 years in my case for my PhD to research the topic that I care about and I think is important. Why I wouldn't now promote my research results? I think, in some of the cases you have interviews, you have focus groups, maybe ethnographic research. Your participants gave you a lot of time. They trusted you. So I think now it's also important, it's a kind of almost a responsibility on you to make the voices heard. So forget about being shy, about promoting yourself, just do it. That's my advice here. A little bit controversial in some cases, but if you want, we can discuss about it later on. The fourth one, this should be the number 4 here. Engage with relevant current discussions. So here I want to give you an example when I recently commented on the census 2021. So maybe you have heard that there was a census in England and Wales, and for the first time in the history, they introduced the questions about gender identity and sexual orientation. Those are the topics that are interested for me, right? I'm interested in LGBTQ identities, LGBTQ representation, gender diversity as well. Do I work on census? No, I don't. Do I know much about quantitative research? Because census is like a survey, so it would be maybe good to know some quant stuff. Not really. I'm very much qualitative researcher. But it doesn't mean that I cannot say something about that. So I think it's important to kind of think about how my research can relate to this new thing that is popping up it's becoming important in society. So for that particular case, I write my opinion about what I think about the kind of questions. I wrote that I think it's a good step in a very good direction. I wrote that there are also some limitations, thinking from critical theory of gender and sexuality. And I published it as on the news pages of the Faculty of Social Sciences. So more like a university website. But then it was also picked up by the news outlets, and I was invited to give a live interview on Sky News about it, but I also accepted. And I ended up on the national TV, which was quite a big thing for me, to be honest. So you can see that sometimes it's like a trickle effect, that I wrote this kind of piece on the university websites, which probably, you know, have quite limited reach. But then some journalists can think about it. Maybe some of the marketing team at the university can pitch it to some media, and then you will end up having much bigger impact that your initial piece would have. Also, that's a small and kind of funny tip, is like tweet about stuff. So I realized when I was I went to Poland at one point doing my field work, and that was the moment of a lot of discussions about Poland introducing so-called LGBTQ free zones. Maybe you've heard about it. So I was quite surprised how a lot of solidarity with LGBTQ people were there. So I took pictures of how different venues, but also individual people, kind of showing the support and solidarity with LGBTQ community by showing the rainbow flag, for example, on the balconies. I just tweeted about it. And then I realized that a newspaper in Germany quoted my tweet in their article. So sometimes it could be very indirect ways on how you kind of how the public will engage with your research, and that's why I said that Twitter is particularly important medium for that. But let's move on. One thing that I also would like to discuss is to respond to the queries. You know, maybe at the early stage of your PhD, you will not get that many queries from the journalists. When you're more established scholars, when you become more public, when you create your Twitter account, when you start publishing blog posts, then you became searchable. And then people become, when they need for an expert on a topic, a lot of activists, journalists, or organizations may contact you about it, to ask about your opinion about things. So this is what happened to me once, that this organization, Open for Business, was creating a report about the, if you could see the title, the economic case for LGBTQ inclusion in Central and Eastern Europe. And they asked me to reanalyze my data from the last project with Polish LGBTQs in the UK, to think about what kind of people migrated from Poland to the UK because they felt that they were discriminated against, or they couldn't have live truly and fully as LGBTQ people in Poland. I didn't know this organization. I thought, I don't know if it was big or not. I thought like, okay, I can do it for them. It's not a big deal. And then it turns out that their report was picked up in the discussions on Council of Europe, which I think is a big deal. So again, these different ways of trickle effect, that sometimes you can just help. You may just tweet about something, you may help with a smaller organization, you can publish a blog post on a kind of smaller collective blog, but it finds its way to have a little bit more impact. So I would encourage you to respond to those queries. I think that very often, especially if you are an early career researcher, it could be defensive reaction to that, saying, well, but I'm not really researching that, right? It's not really my topic. As I told you with the census, like, well, I'm not really familiar with the census. I don't know much about it. So shall I actually, am I the right person to give them my opinion about it? Well, first of all, remember that you probably know much more about the topic than those who make the query. In my case, I'm doing research about Polish LGBTQ communities for about 10 years. So even though this new topic is not exactly what I'm doing, I still have a lot of contextual information about that topic, right? So I still could offer a lot of different perspective on that topic. Also, I can learn some new things. For the census piece, of course, I had to check what was the questions, how is it formulated. I checked what different communities, LGBT communities, are thinking about it. So then during my interviews with Sky News, I could say, yes, there is support, or no, there is no support in the community about it. So I had to do some extra work, but it's a topic that I'm interested in anyway. So I found it very enriching in a way that I can, a little bit extend my topic, because I have to think how it relates. The big discussions I have, for example, about gender diversity, and how does that relate to the question in census, which was not really my question, but it's part of my larger topic, theme of interest, I would say. Now, you have to be a little bit careful here as well. You don't want to take the spot of the marginalized folks, so assess on a case-by-case basis. Once, for example, Al Jazeera contacted me to comment on the protests in Poland that were anti-new bill that was very much anti-abortion in Poland. And I had some opinions about it. I'm studying gender and sexuality in relation to Poland in general, but I thought for that particular topic, I can think about some better people. I can think about some colleagues in Poland, female colleagues, who are actually studying abortion more in depth than I do. So I just said, no, thank you. I think there are better people to comment on that. And I gave the email addresses of my colleagues to the journalists instead of myself offering my opinion. So take that into account as well. And also assess the profile of the journalist. You don't want to do the harm, right? So if there's some very right-wing journalists from Poland asking me to comment about something, I will really think twice or 3 times before I give them the interview. If I could see that they are really open to the discussion, and I could see their previous articles and see that they have different view, but maybe they do want to discuss it in a kind of productive way, I would still probably say yes. But if I could see that they just want to use my name and use my affiliation with the university to legitimize their own pieces, I would probably say no, because I could be pretty sure that they will use my words instrumentally just to promote their own hateful and harmful publications. So you have to take that into account, especially when you're working with marginalized communities and when you're working on sensitive topics. So sometimes it's good to say no as well, and there are good reasons for that. Even though my general idea was, please do respond to the queries of the journalists and organizations. That's also one case that I wanted to give you an example of. So with my research with Polish LGBTQs in the UK, I was contacted by a Polish journalist that's working for this portal for Polish diaspora in the UK. And he was very positive and very enthusiastic and very empathetic about my research. So I said yes. He wrote this really nice article about the experiences of Polish LGBTQs in the UK based on my research. I really like it. He sent it to me before publication. And then you cannot see here really on that slide, but there was 166 comments under that article. That normally doesn't happen for that medium, for that outlet. And most of them were very hateful. It was just a hate on my speech. So I thought there's not really a dialogue there happening. So I kind of started questioning if that was a good decision that I gave that interview. There are different pros and cons. Again, I'm not going to in-depth into them right now, but we can discuss about it later on. Also organize events in collaboration with others. Sometimes you can budget them in your project. So some of you may think about your next project, maybe your postdoctoral project, budget those events in your project proposals. Here's an example that I organized in London in one of the LGBTQ spaces, Dalston Superstore, about my research with Polish LGBTQs in the UK. But also you can join some events that are already existing. So I also work with Migration Matters Festival in Sheffield. So when I moved to Sheffield, I realized, well, there is this big Migration Matters Festival. I work with Polish LGBTQ migrants. And then I realized that in the program, there was almost nothing about queer migration. So I contacted them, and they were very enthusiastic about adding a full day. And they asked me to curate it about queer migration, and then asked for budget. And they gave me, I think, then some budget for organizing that event, that one day. Why it's important? Because you should always pay your collaborators. So that's very important. I think pay artists. Don't expect them to do it for free. Either pay it from your own budget, from the university grants, or try the organizations you are working with, like I was working with Migration Matters Festival, to give you money so we can actually pay artists, pay for their accommodation, pay for their transport, and so on, and also pay for their work. So pay a fee for them. Also think about workloading yourself. You know, it takes time, especially organizing this kind of like full day of queer migration at the festival with 5 different artists. It takes a lot of organizing. So think about it also, how much time it will take you. But it's also very rewarding experience. Now I'm trying to rush a little bit because I'm saying that I'm going out of the time, but I'm almost at the end of my presentation. Some small final points: train yourself. There's a lot of training available, both at your university, I'm sure about it. Here's an example from the University of Sheffield, but also at White Rose, doctoral training that gives you those different, more specific also information about how to write a blog post, how to pitch an idea to popular media, and so on. So check those trainings and use that to think about how you can promote your research to the larger public. And document your public engagement activities. So take screenshots, keep leaflets, hard copies, ask for feedback from both the collaborators and from your audiences. So if you organize an event, maybe you would like to give the people a survey at the end to know for yourself what they think about it, if they like it or not, what was good about it or what could be improved. But also it's important for your career development, because very often you have to document it in some way, especially in the future when you want to be promoted, when you want to create impact case for the REF exercise, if it will still exist in 7 years' time. But it's important to do that. Also, very funny advice, I would say, Google News yourself. So I give you an example at the very beginning about this article in French Slate that used my article. I would never know about it if I didn't Google myself, because the journalists never contacted me. They never told me that, oh, I published an article and I used your academic article that was open access. They just publish, they just use it and publish it. So when I Google myself, especially using Google News option, then I found out many, like at least 10 articles, media articles that quoted my work, which of course can very much strengthen your CV in that respect. And one of the final, I think, advice is just email people. You would be surprised how often I didn't have any contact with journalists, with organizations. I just had an idea and I thought, hey, I found that I identified people on the internet, and then just write to them, hey, I have this idea about this article. I can publish about it. I think it's important because of this, this, and that. Very often, I didn't get the response. A couple of times I did get response, including from this major daily in Poland, and then my article was published there. So don't be afraid, just email people. And finally, why it's important? How Google News yourself. You should go to the Google search, search the phrase like Lukasz Szulc LGBTQ, and then you have the tools, the toolbar below the Google below the Google logo, and then you can choose like news, and you will find it there. Or just Google how to Google news yourself, and then I'm sure you will find it as well. Now, so why is it important to finish? I think we should care about the impact of our research, because in the end, what we do, even if it's interesting theoretically, intellectually, I think we should, and personally, I do care that what's impact of that is for the society, what actually society gets from it. We can also develop new skills like which helps you to increase your employability, writing op-eds, making podcasts, and so on. We can meet new people, making academic work less lonely. Like for me, working on organizing some events, that was super rewarding. We can get inspired for a new project. So listen to your audience. What are they interested in? I'm designing a new project that was inspired by some discussions with journalists, because I could see, oh, journalists are interested in that topic. And this is kind of relevant to my topic. So of course, I just shouldn't do research on what other people think is important. We are expert in our field because we are expert in our field. So we should also make our own choices. But you can maybe tweak it a little bit because you know what society finds important nowadays. And it's also important for employees and funders. So it is important in your job applications, in your probation, promotion applications, and for rep. So I will finish here. So at least we have 10 minutes for the questions. I hope you enjoyed the talk. I hope you find it useful, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.